Hello, everyone. Just wanted to talk about the Nagel study questions. These are just sort of very general reviews of the kind of answers I was looking for, and what you should be doing with these little review videos for the study questions is just comparing what you wrote with what I say, and if you're way off, you know, correcting your view or getting in touch with me for more clarification. So, number one, Nagel states the basic question of his essay on the first page. What is it? I don't remember. What? Oh, right. Yeah, there it is. Whether it's a bad thing to die. Yes, that has a very simple answer. Um, that is the basic question of his essay, and of course his answer is a qualified yes, that it is bad, generally speaking. Um, but depending on the context of our life, it may not be always a bad thing, but at least sometimes is a bad thing to die for the person who dies. That's what that right. I mean, that's the question here. The question is not whether death is bad for the people left behind who are still living, whether the death of a loved one is it bad for you when you grieve. Of course it is. That's not the question. The question is whether death is bad for the one who dies. So that's the question. Yeah, and obviously he's answering it in at least a qualified yes. Number two, Nagel states the two positions on the basic question of his essay on the first page. What are they? Well, we don't even have to look. The two positions are basically, although he does not name him, the Epicurean position, that it makes no sense to say that it's bad to die for all the reasons that we were talking about in terms of Epicurus, and the other position that since death is the loss of everything, that it's the worst thing that can happen to us. Number three, what is the natural view that Nagel says he will be defending in this essay? Well, by remember that is the natural view is that death is bad. That death is right, as his second paragraph here on page 74, the natural view that death is an evil because it brings to an end all the goods that life contains. That's what Nagel considers to be the natural view, the common sense view, the widespread view about death, and the one that he aims to give a philosophical justification for. Number four, what reasons does Nagel offer for why life is good? How do these reasons differ from reasons for death being bad? Well, this really has to do with Nagel's distinction between the different ways in which life is good as opposed to the ways in which death is bad. And this is at the bottom of page 74, where he says, if we turn from what is good about life to what is bad about death, the case is completely different. Essentially, though there may be problems about their specifications, what we find desirable in life are certain states, conditions, or types of activity. It is being alive, doing certain things, having certain experiences that we consider good. But if death is an evil, it is the loss of life, rather than the state of being dead or non-existent or unconscious that is objectionable. So life is good because being alive is good, whereas death is bad not because being dead is bad. Being dead is bad because it entails a loss of life. So although we have to make room for things like suffering and things like that, being alive is intrinsically good. But being dead is not intrinsically bad. It's not a bad state, the way that being alive is a good state. It's no state. So if death is bad, it's not because the state of being dead is bad, because the state of being dead is nothing. He is an Epicurean to that degree. But our non-existence entails a loss. And that's what makes death bad, which is different way. Number five, Nagel says it may be doubted that there are any evils which consist merely in the deprivation or absence of possible goods, and which do not depend on someone's minding that deprivation, unquote. Explain how this poses a problem for any theory which says death is bad because of the deprivation of goods. Well, I mean, It's very simple, but I just really wanted you to get thinking about this because it's such an important part of Nagel's argument and such an important hurdle that he has to overcome, and that's the hurdle of awareness. How can a deprivation or loss be a bad for someone who doesn't mind the deprivation? That's the big question here. So if you just say that death is a bad because it's a deprivation of goods, you haven't really addressed the fundamental question or part, that is, how can something be a bad for somebody if they don't exist? How can something being be a bad for somebody if they don't mind being deprived? They don't mind it, and that's the hurdle that Nagel really has to overcome with death. That is that he concedes that the dead no longer exists. He's not talking about any kind of afterlife. So they don't mind being dead. If they experience a loss, the loss of life, they're not aware of that loss, and so they don't mind that loss. So somehow you have to argue that despite not minding it, because they don't exist, that something bad did happen to the dead when they died, even though the loss that they incur is not one that bothers them. Right? It's a very big part of this essay. Number 6, Nagel refers to the common remark that what you don't know can't hurt you. Does he agree or disagree with this remark? Well, it's fundamental that he disagrees with it. Because what he's arguing is that what you don't know can hurt you. What you don't know and are not affected by, because you don't exist, can hurt you. That's the big problem that he has to solve. So we would definitely disagree with that remark. Number 7, describe Nagel's hypothetical about the man who has a brain injury. How is this hypothetical relevant to whether the deprivation caused by death is a bad thing? Well, the big point about that hypothetical is that the man who's had the brain injury is not aware of his injury. The man who has lost all of his adult faculties, mental faculties, is not aware of the loss and doesn't mind the loss, is not suffering in the sense of being made unhappy by the loss. Yet, Nagel says, we still think that something bad has happened to him, even though if we point to his mental state, he's got the mental state of a happy infant. This is relevant to the deprivation caused by death because the death are similarly unaware of their deprivation. So if we can call the man who's had the brain injury unfortunate, if we say a bad thing has happened to him, Nagel is arguing, then we should be able to say that a bad thing has happened to the dead, even though, like him, they're not aware of their loss. So that's a big issue. I mean, that's a big point in his essay, I think. I think it's actually that hypothetical about the man with the brain injury is really his strongest point in support of his anti-Epicurean position. Number 8, Nagel's basis for saying that death is bad for a man who has died is that he has lost his life, and if he had not died, he would have continued to live it and to possess whatever good there is in living. Do you think this is a coherent theory of the badness of death? Why or why not? Well, I asked that question, I suppose, because he offers a kind of a view of why death is bad. And death is bad because it negates all the future possible goods that we would have a chance at experiencing. So because death ends your life, it ends also the possibility of experiencing those goods. So if you had not died when you did, you would have gone on to experience more of life's goods. So dying when you did was a bad. It does make sense. Whether it's coherent in the sense of making sense, well, what I'm really was suggesting there, I suppose, is that something I might have brought up in the videos, and that is that does that mean that every time something happens to us that prevents us from experiencing future goods, does it mean something bad happened to us? It may be that is an implication of Nagel's theory of the badness of death, and it may be that gets out of control. But that's basically what I was asking. Number 9, does Nagel think that death is a bad for someone who dies in extreme old age? Why or why not? I think that given that his idea of the badness of death is that it's bad because it's a loss of future goods, you would have to say that anybody who had possible future goods and died that something bad had happened to them, no matter what age they were, that would be fairly irrelevant, although he does struggle with the idea that because we have a so-called natural lifespan, it may not make sense to say that death is bad for someone who's reached it.